Rock on. Thank you everybody for joining. This is what is this? April 2025 installment of the Microsoft Data Platform Continuity Virtual Group. With me today, longtime friend, Tim Radney. How long have I known you? What, 14 years?
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, 14, 15 years, something like that. It's just wild. So Tim quite literally wrote the book on his topic today. It's going to be talking about understanding SQL Server backup and restores. And this is not a glamorous topic, but if you're a career DBA, this should be near and dear to your heart. So with that, I'll turn it over.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm truly surprised either of us have kept a friend for 15 years. Yeah, so this topic, I mean, truly is it's the what I call the bread and butter. I mean, we need to understand how to take proper backups of our systems, and that's one aspect of it. We always hear you need a backup strategy, you need a backup plan, and David and I'll be the first ones to tell you it's like, no, you need a recovery plan. You need you to be focused on how you recover your environment, not just that you have backups. And we're going to dive into that as a big part of this topic. And one thing that kind of struck me, many years ago when I started managing DBAs and speaking on this topic is how many have ever restored a database? And every hand would go up. I'm like, okay, well, who's ever restored a full and then applied transaction log backups to get the database up to a point in time? And it's like one or two out of 100 hands would go up because it's just something that not a lot of people have done or practiced. They know it in theory, but reality is they've worked at an organization where all they've ever had to do is refresh lower environments with a copy of production. So take a full, restore the full, type of thing. So what we're going to talk about is all the different backup types, and then we'll jump into demos. So I have very few slides, and so I'll get those going. The my contact information. So tim@timradney.com. You can Google Bing me. Just remember the name. You'll find a YouTube channel, Pluralsight courses, books, all of those things. But if you have any questions from this, just reach out to me on LinkedIn, X, um, or just email or harass David and he'll get in touch with me. So what are we going to cover? First is your backup types in SLAs. Why SLAs matter. So those SLAs are your service level agreements. So we'll talk about the couple that are really pertinent to us as data professionals. I want to cover how to know that your backups are valid. I'm going to show you an approach for backing up very large databases, and very large is subjective. What's big to one person might not be another, but I think we can all agree, hundreds of gigabytes, once you start hitting hundreds of gigabytes, and it's many years worth of data, we can start looking at handling those differently. I'm afraid to ask David, what's the largest database that you've worked on? Mine was 13 terabytes. I mean,
My
excuse me, 13 petabytes, which was insane.
biggest single database I've ever worked on was 147 terabytes, but
Terabytes.
they had a lot of them in their environment. They had about zero point 0.6 exabytes of SQL Server data
Jeez.
total in
Total.
production.
That's crazy. Yeah. With those, it's like I really don't want to touch it. I mean, you can't do hardly anything. You start getting into hundreds of billions of rows of tables, and tables are hundreds of columns wide. It's like just no. And then we really get into the the meat of this is having a restore strategy. I'm going to show you some demos on performing point in time restores. So not just, hey, we're applying a transaction or the full and diff and transaction log, but truly getting down to a specific point in time. And then what's called piecemeal restores. That's a fun one because when we're talking about those large databases, if you can partition, you can bring on different pieces of that database at a time, so different file groups. And then just talking about the plan. What David and I can sit and talk to you for hours and hours and hours about is having that solid restore strategy and a proven disaster recovery plan. Um, I'm seeing more and more companies with that disaster recovery plan that are reaching out kind of a day late on, hey, we had an issue, we had a flood, we were infected with um, ransomware, different things, and what can we do? Well, the time to plan that is before the event occurs. So let's jump on in. So those service level agreements, I love having this conversation with a new customer, is what is your recovery point objective? Meaning how much data can you afford to lose? And then what's your recovery time objective? Meaning how long can you be down? And if you've ever asked a company that question, the number one answer is no data loss, no downtime. And then you start talking about a $40 million implementation to try to achieve that. And like, well, hold up. What can I do for less? And it's like, well, transaction log backups every 10 minutes, a DR site, 4 hours, we can accomplish that much more affordably. And that's really kind of the industry standard. But what I'd like to point out is the time start when the incident occurs, not when you get called or when you get to start taking a look at the situation. So keep in mind, if that whole server is lost, who's responsible for the server and getting it up? Active Directory, the storage, all of those other things. If you have a 4-hour SLA from the time the event occurs to restoring customer functionality, when do you get access to that environment to start doing database restores? So that's something to kind of keep in mind. So if it's 4 hours, you don't have a full 4 hours, depending on the level of the event. So based on that, you may need to start looking at the HA side of the DR, right? High availability, meaning that you have another copy sitting there. So whether it's an availability group, whether it's a failover cluster, any of those types of situations to help mitigate that potential outage, or it may be cross-region disaster recovery where you're log shipping, you're doing some block level replication, you're doing something else to be.
You okay?
That's my road. I don't know.
Did the demo god strike early?
No, I don't know if you can hear me.
Very faint. I don't know what else the audio switched to. Yep. Bear with us, everybody.
So it came back.
Welcome to live.
What did this? Can you hear me now?
Still real faint.
All right, here we go. All right, now.
That's good.
For some reason, it's like the road disappeared, and then it wanted to switch to my webcam and then monitors, and so hopefully, I don't know if it was one of the VMs tried to grab the road or what. But all right, so you back on. You you need. So speaking of VR, here's my other backup camera
Yep.
microphone. So if I have to, I can switch out. Um, so it's near time, not real time. But it's, depending on those SLAs, then you may have to start looking at high availability to try to mitigate that potential like 4-hour window, because 4 hours is pretty quick. Usually with those, you have a proven disaster recovery plan. You have either a hot or a cold, where you just have to spin up and sync some data. But that's something to think about. And as a data professional, it's my job to make the organizations aware of these risks, and it's their decision whether they're going to spend the money on those insurance policies, meaning high availability, a more robust disaster recovery situation. And so what I tell people is always have that in writing. And I think David's the one that taught me that is, you work for an organization, you've let your manager or their manager know, hey, here's the gap. They're like, yeah, that's not in the budget. Take that email, print the PDF, have on a thumb drive. I get a new boss. We have our first meeting. Hey, so just want to make you aware. Boom, 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 boom. previous management said it wasn't worth the expense, but you need to be aware. And then yep, I agree with so and so. That's not in the budget. Print the PDF, save that. Eventually, somebody's going to care enough about it, hopefully, that they're going to do something about it. There's also, like back when I worked for financial institutions, was making the business unit aware of that, not just the IT side, tend to get things moving a little better because it's business continuity. And they honestly have the purse string, so they could come up with a budget to fund that because it's important to their business versus us being a cost center. That's an unneeded expense to some folks. All right, so the backup types. Everyone's probably familiar with full, so that's a full copy plus a portion of the transaction log, so you can go through crash recovery and have the database back up to the time or close to the time that full completed. Then we have differentials. So differentials is all data that has changed since the last full. So when you do a full backup, it knocks down all those differential bitmaps. Anytime a page is changed, its differential bitmap stands up. And if you do a differential, it's backing up all those pages where the differential bitmap has been, flag has been set. The only thing that resets that is another full. So if you do a full on Sunday, then Monday differential is all data that's changed since Sunday. Tuesday is all data that's changed since Sunday, Wednesday, and so forth. So your differentials technically will grow, each day because more data has changed, but it's still a lot less than a full being taken 7 days a week. So when you start getting to larger databases, you may find that backup storage is becoming a premium, and a way to help mitigate that is weekly full and then differentials the other 6 days of the week, while you also have transaction log backups going every however many minutes. If you start partitioning, you can back up individual file groups, and I'll show you that. There's file, which is, I don't see anymore. To me, that was like the back in the day where you'd stop SQL Server service, back the whole thing up. Now we have the volume shadow copy and third-party tools that can quiesce and back up and things. Don't really see anybody stopping SQL. Your transaction log backups, if you're in full recovery, you need to be having the transaction log backups. And then if you're doing differentials is where this copy only is super important, because copy only says do not reset the differential bitmap. So if you take a one-off full, it's not going to reset, and those diffs taken after that belong to that one-off full backup. So some combination of those above are what organizations use. So I typically see either full with transaction log or full diff and transaction log, and maybe 1 out of 50 customers that have partition data that we might be looking at file group, but that's pretty rare. I have a script that I use not daily, but several times a week when I'm looking at different customers, that it gives me the name of the database, the recovery model, when the last full was taken, the last differential, and the last 2 transaction logs. So from that, I can see that a database is in full recovery with no transaction log backups, which is not good. I can see from the last 2 transaction logs the interval, so what time. So are they every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, every hour, what is their backup interval? And so from that, I can glean potential gaps and misses in their recovery strategy. So just take a look. I need to publish an update to that where I can include the file path, and if it was copy only, some other tidbits. But for the most part, that script gets me what I need. So I talked about the very large databases, and I've hinted to it. Being able to carve that data out into different file groups based upon some logic. And usually I've always used date and time. So if I'm working with data, and especially if it's data that's never going to change, like financial data, say check images or different things, you're not updating the dollar amount that you wrote. You're not updating the MICR information on a check. You're not updating those things. Once it comes in, it's set, and we just have to maintain it for a set number of years. So I could move that data into yearly file groups. And since it's not being modified, I could even set it read only. And then once I know it's backed up and I have a backup that I've proven I can restore that from, I don't have to worry about it as often. So maybe then I get to a monthly full backup, but I'm doing daily for the primary read write file group and don't have to worry about those read only yearly file groups that aren't needed or aren't being changed. I know I have this monthly that I can restore those file groups from. It just gives you more leverage. But also having that data in read only file groups means I'm not running index maintenance and things like that because it's not changing. So it gives you a lot more flexibility, but the number one thing is it gives me the ability to restore the read write data, that more recent data, much more quickly. So if I'm dealing with a terabyte database and only 100 gig is active, the other 900 gig is older data, I could bring that 100 gig online much more quickly than a full terabyte. Those other yearly file groups on later. So it helps me restore end user functionality much more quickly than having to restore massive numbers of petabytes or terabytes. So I'll show you a quick demo on that. Recovering transactions. This is the one that gets a lot of folks because we've done plenty of restores, but we've never tested or played with restoring a full and then applying transaction logs in the order that they were taken. If you've ever gone to do a backup and you've been tripped by the little, hey, you need to take a tail log backup. It's like, what does that mean? It means that there's been transactions since the last transaction log backup. And if you're going to overwrite that database, so you're trying to do a restore and says, oh, we're going to take a tail log before we do the restore. That's what it's trying to prevent is you losing data because you have transactions that have not been backed up. So that's all a tail log is any transactions that have occurred since the last transaction log backup. So if we need to perform an emergency restore, like, what order are you needing to restore the database? So your full, differential if you're taking them, and then transaction logs in the order that they were taken up to the tail of the log, if you can back up that tail end of the log. So everybody tracking. All right. So the slide I could talk on for hours. So how do you know that your backups are good? You restore them. So regularly restoring your backups does a lot of things. First, it lets you know that your backups are good. It gives you the experience of restoring those backups. It also lets you know how long it's going to take to restore. I've worked with a lot of organizations where they buy a new application and they implement this new piece of software. Well, when you start off, your database is small, but over time, like a lot of its caregivers, we expand over time as well. So it gets bigger and bigger. Well, what you used to be able to restore in 10 minutes, and when it was 100 gig, now maybe it's a terabyte, it's going to take much longer. So by regularly restoring, you're able to see how long these restores are taking. So you can map that against your SLAs to see, are you getting too close to that SLA for comfort to know that if we did truly have an outage, we may not be able to restore in the time frame that we've been given. Also, if you're in an organization that is regularly audited, finance, healthcare, things like that, having a restore validation process where you can show that we regularly restore usually means those examiners and auditors leave you alone and they'll go harass someone else. I've talked about backing up user databases. Has anyone ever had to restore an instance? Like you lost the whole thing, so you're having to restore all the user databases to a brand new server? What did you do about users and permissions? Did you restore master? I mean, hopefully you got master backed up, but to restore master is pretty intense. You have to get into like a recovery mode. You have to restore master. Master or the instance has to be at the exact same patch level, so CU level. So 15.0 dot those last numbers, you have to be at the exact same. So it gets complicated. And why are we restoring master is to get users and permissions, but you could script those out using the sp_help_rev login stored procedure. So I've got the KB article up there. What I've done for a lot of customers I've worked with over the years is just put that into a job. I mean, it's a stored procedure, and then just store the output where I'm putting the backups. So now I have the users, their SIDs, their permissions, already scripted out. So unless a SQL account changed its password that day, I've got everything I need. So I don't have to worry about restoring master. MSDB, different. You got all those SQL agent jobs. You want to restore MSDB. So practice those things. But ultimately, you just need to know your facts. How long is this going to take? Have a plan that you've rehearsed, that you know how to go through and restore all of these. And then more importantly, if you're in an organization that does regular DR test, is have a run book on how to do this and make somebody else get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go participate in the DR exercise and you stay asleep. Because in the event of a DR, I, I'm not concerned about the local company I work for down the street, where I work from home. If their building is a smoking hole or it's flooded, I'm worried about me and my family, not restoring their databases. So they need the person that's in some other part of the world that's connecting in to be able to run my run book. So I need it detailed enough that somebody else can go and execute it. Now, if I need to be there and be executing somebody else's run book for a technology I don't know to prove that they have every button highlighted and checkbox, great, let's test it. But they need someone other than a DBA restoring the database servers in the event of a true DR. So that's why you need to know your facts and have everything documented and have a proven, repeatable plan. So let's jump into the demos. All right, questions up to this point? So all this demo code is available on my website. So that was the timradney.com/presentations. Click on the Understanding SQL Server Backup and Restore. Even the sample databases are there. So what I'm going to do is start off, make sure I'm in a good place, is restore my backup sample database. And then I'm going to clear my backup history just because I want everything good. And we're going to take a look at the top 10 sales order IDs. So it stops with 75123. So what we're going to do is just step through and simulate. We're an organization that does transactional log backups every 15 minutes. So I'm going to loop through. We're going to do a backup and then backup log 1. And then we're going to insert a transaction 75150, do a second transaction log backup, 75200 insert, third log backup, 75250, and then a final transaction log backup. So we're simulating an hour's worth of work. How would we restore this? If right now we had a catastrophic failure and we have these transactions that we've backed up, database goes kaput, maybe a storage vendor, you pulled the plug on the wrong storage array, or they formatted the wrong one, and we lose our backup sample database. How do we restore it? We have a full, we have 4 transaction log backups. So it's the full and then the last transaction log, or do we need to restore all 4 transaction logs? Let's take a look. I'm the type that if I can script something, I'm going to script it. So that's what's happening. The VM tried to take my mic. So with this, and this code is included in the presentation demo code. So this will generate my restore script. So I have my full, and then log 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the final restore database backup sample with recovery. So because this has the backup database name in it, this could be a parameter. So you could take this code, and if you're looping through using something like Ola Hallegren or something else, is you already have the database name as a parameter, is then turn this into a stored procedure, call it with that DB name, and just have it output to a file. So every time you run a backup, it will generate your restore script. Just saying. I've got that code out there in a whole bunch of places. All right, so that's pretty neat. So to get this back is restore the full and then the 4 transaction logs. What if we're doing differentials? It's kind of same concept. We're going to restore back to a known Now we're going to do a full, and then we're going to do a transaction log backups. We're going to insert transactions again. So 75150. We're doing a log backup. 75250. Now we're doing a differential. So what is unique about a differential backup? Backup database, database name, to disk, give it a path. You just specify with differential. That's it. And then insert another transaction, 75400. Do a log backup, 75500, and then the fourth transaction log backup. All right, how do we restore this one? So we have a full, we have a transaction log backup, we have a differential, and we have a couple of transaction log backups. There's a few ways, or two ways. You can restore the full and then all the transaction log backups in the order, or you can restore the full, the differential, and then the transaction log backups after the differential. So the differential can help you skip having to restore a ton of transaction log backups. So we have our full, diff, log 3 and 4. So we're able to skip log 1 and 2. Now, a differential backup does not interfere with your LSN. So what it's able to do is roll these transactions or the changes. So as you're restoring, the transaction logs know that the data is up to the point. So it's not replaying all the transactions, but it's the final state of those pages at the time the differential was taken. So this is why we're able to do a weekly full, daily differential, and then your transaction logs after the diff. So again, pretty slick and can do the exact same thing. So now with this script, whether I'm doing fulls, differentials, transaction logs, it will have the restore script that I need. The only thing that's missing is if I'm able to recover the tail end of the transaction log. All right, let's take a look at the piecemeal. So this one, we're going to use the backup file group sample. So I'm going to restore it because I think I was playing around in it earlier. Let's take a look at this database first. So it should look very familiar where you have the data file, your primary data file, your transaction log. Notice we have file group primary. We look at file groups, we only have primary. So just a standard MDF, LDF database. All right, what I want to show you here is that we have 121,173 rows. All right, we're going to be messing with that. So I'm going to do a backup, and then I'm backing up the log to null so that I can go through and mess around with it. We're going to add 3 file groups, and then I'm going to add a file to each file group. And I need to go through and update this to have a 23 and a 24, get rid of some of this older data. Now let's take a look back at the properties. We'll see files. We now have a 2020, 2021, and 2022. Notice the Microsoft best practice of 1 meg default size and auto growth by 1 meg. Yeah. And then we look at file groups. We have a 2020, 21, and 22. Now we are going to partition this data. And this is just a copy of an AdventureWorks table. It's what we're working on, the I think sales order. So we'll partition, and it's just by year. So we go back, look at properties. And we can see now the data, the file size has changed. 6 meg, 2 meg, 3 meg. So data did move around in this database. All right. So I can back up the full database. Notice here, it's just backup database, database name, to disk. And you can see it backed up the file group, the primary, the 2020, 21, and 22. So even though it was full backup, it also specified which file groups. I could also, in my own script, this is a full backup because I'm doing primary in all the individual file groups, or I could do just backup database file group sample file group equals primary, and only back up the primary or only back up one of the other file groups. It's pretty neat. All right, so since we have partitioned, we haven't changed anything yet, we haven't restored anything, we still have the 121,173 rows. Now let's restore just the primary file group. Notice the syntax, with partial. It's the only time I've ever found where I could use this. So I'm saying do a partial restore. Bring it online with recovery, and I'm replacing the file that's there. So I'm restoring the backup file group sample database, the primary file group only. So with partial, meaning only that portion of the database. All right, it worked. Now let's take a look at the sys database files, and we can see that backup file group sample and the log are online because I restored the primary file group, but 2020, 21, and 22 are in a recovery pending state. So the database is there, but not all of it. So can we query data? So everything greater than 2023, which is in the primary file group, I have 50,000 records. What if I try to query where it's older? I get one of the partitions of the index for table DBO cells resides on a file group 2020 that cannot be accessed or is offline, restoring, or defunct. This may limit the query result. Well, results, yep, I have nothing. So let's restore 2020. Now we can see primary. Oh, skipped one. Now we can see primary and 2020 online. So if I query 2020 between January 1st and December 30th, I have 45,000 rows. But if I try to query greater than 2020, I get that message. But did y'all see it flash? It looked like some results, may limit results. Well, yeah, 43,948 rows it displayed before it errored. But so 43,948, 45. So we're missing some data. All right, so if I bookmark 2023 and 2020, then I have all the results available in those two ranges. So this is pretty neat. I mean, if I'm dealing with a massive size database and I'm in a type of industry where as long as I can restore the previous 30 days, 90 days, 12 months, whatever is in that primary or the read-write file groups, and I've moved all this archive data off, yeah, I still have people that need to access the archive, but maybe it's my back room, investigators or audit teams. It's not my external customers. It's people handling subpoenas or different things. I can restore end user functionality much more quickly. So just keep that in mind. You may have an opportunity to take advantage of something like this. So we've now brought all the database or all the file groups on. We have our 121,173 rows. So I just thought this was really neat. I've had to use it a few times, but this one is the really fun. It's the tail log. So we're going to use backups that we've already taken. So the sample base log 1, 2, 3, 4. Take a look at the top one. It's 75250. So we're going to insert another record, 99999. Take a look at the top two, 75250 and 5 nines. That almost unachievable SLA. So we're going to have a really bad day. We're setting our database backup sample offline. I'm going to come in here to my SQL data backup sample, and I'm going to delete. So I just deleted my MDF. Who thinks I can bring this database online? Hopefully no one. There's no MDF file. You can't really get more corrupt than the whole file is missing. I mean, I could open it with a hex editor and just run my finger across the keyboard, and it's pretty nasty. But it being gone is pretty rough. Well, let's take a look. Let me refresh databases. Recovery pending. I've seen that before. Well, what if I try to back up the transaction log? Of course not. Database backup sample cannot be opened due to inaccessible files, insufficient memory or disk space. Yeah, because what happens when you do a backup? You get a checkpoint that's written and there's no MDF. Well, what if I can use with no truncate? So don't try to truncate the transaction log. Don't issue a checkpoint. I'm doing with init to just overwrite this file if it exists, but it's with no truncate. We just processed 3 pages. We just backed up the transaction log of a database that has no data file. That's pretty impressive. So as long as you can get access to the LDF, you could potentially back up the tail end of the log. So what does that mean? That means 0 data loss. That means a promotion, a raise, an extra week of vacation, ransom. I mean, however you want to exploit it. So now let's take that tail log, add it to the restore that we did above. We take a look. We have the 5 nines. That's pretty awesome. But what if, this particular instance, I lost the whole thing? So I don't have a master, right? So this instance was still up. I just lost the MDF of my user database. I'm glad you all asked. Let's go to another VM. So on this one, because I back up my databases to a network share or copy them offsite, I have my transaction log backups. I have all of that. So if I have access to the LDF, this instance has no backup sample database. So we're just going to create one. So create the backup sample. I'm going to set the database offline. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to my SQL data folder. I'm going to delete the MDF. Since I was able to back up that transaction log, I go into my backups folder and I have the tail log, I have the backup sample log file. So I have that access to that LDF, right? We're going to overwrite it. Yep, tracking so far. I created an empty database, deleted the data file, replaced the transaction log file, the LDF, with my good one. So overriding the bad one or the empty one. It's not bad. It's just nothing in it. So now I'll try to bring that database online. Of course, it's going to fail. I refresh, but I have backup sample and a recovery pending. So back up the transaction log. I get the 3 pages. Same thing we did on the other VM. So we took a transaction log, attached it, basically did a hack attach. We didn't technically attach it to the database because we had deleted the data file, but we overwrote the empty LDF with an LDF with transactions in it and was able to back up the tail log. So since we have all of our backups somewhere else offsite, we grab them. We have the tail log that we just took. We're able to restore the database and get that tail of the log back up. So 0 data loss. Now, did it take me another minute or 2 to recover this database? Probably, but 0 data loss. Which hurts a company worse? Hey, sorry we were down, or hey, sorry we lost your data. Reputational loss is massive. Now, if my mortgage company called and said, hey, we lost your loan, so we owe you nothing, you owe us nothing, I wouldn't be upset, right? But if they say, hey, we lost your payment, you need to prove that you made your payment and all that, I'd be upset, right? So reputational loss is a big thing. So this is one of my absolute favorite things to show because so many people are not aware that this can be done. And this is truly that game changer of potentially 0 data loss. All right, let me get out of that database. So dealing with encryption, hopefully this one will all work. We're going to create a master key called SQL skills. Oh, nope, I didn't drop them. All right, so we're going to create a master key. And then before you can start using these things, you have to back them up, but we're also going to create a certificate called the SQL Skills Encrypt Cert. Now we're going to back up the master key, and you have to give it a complex password, preferably not complex password. So we'll back up the master key, and then we'll back up our certificate. Now, the important thing is with the certificate, you can't start using it until you back it up, which is good. It means Microsoft is forcing us to have a backup somewhere. But this is gold. You cannot restore the certificate or create it anywhere else unless you have it from the file. So your DR site, if you're restoring this database to a lower environment, you can have these keys anywhere you want, but you have to back them up and then create them. And I'll show you how to create from the backup. All right, so now we're going to do some backups. Let me just make sure that this folder is clean. We're doing SQL backup. Okay, good. Just has those keys. So what we're going to do is a backup with encryption using the AES-256, but also using compression, and then a backup with no encryption, no compression. So what this is going to show us is, can you still use encryption with compression? Then we take a look. Compressed is 4.79 meg. Uncompressed is 16 meg. So even with encryption, you can still compress. All right, we need to restore the database. I can just restore. The certificate's already here. The restore is no different. But if I drop the certificate and then I try to restore, it tells me cannot find this certificate with thumbprint, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, we'll copy paste from above. We're just going to create the certificate, right? It was easy to do, just create certificate with a subject. So we created the certificate. Now we try to restore. Well, every time you create one, it's a different thumbprint. It's always unique, right? So we get rid of that cert. Now we use the one that we backed up. So create certificate from file versus just create certificate with subject. So create cert from file with a private key, and then the password I use to encrypt it. So please be using a key vault, storing these things. So we basically restored our certificate, but the proper syntax is create from file. So now we're able to restore it. So very simple, but if you don't have your key and you don't have the password that you encrypted it with, I forget who coined the phrase, but you basically just have a very large virtual doorstop, just a big blob taking up space that you can't do anything with, but look at it and cry. All right, Azure storage. I've destroyed my Azure environment a while back. Just wanted to show you this. So you can back up database to URL. And I believe, was it 2022 that introduced now you can also back up to AWS buckets, finally, which I lost my joke. I used to say you can back up to whatever URL you want, so long as it's Azure. Just like Henry Ford, you can have the Model T in whatever color you want, so long as it's black. But now you can back up to Azure and AWS. You would just create a credential, which is access to your storage account, and then back up to URL versus disk, and then restore from URL instead of disk. So very straightforward. I have only ever used this for a Azure SQL managed instance migration. Why? When I need to do restores, I want to restore them as fast as possible. And unless I have like a 10 gig express route, restoring from Azure versus local disk or a disk within my network is probably not going to be the fastest option. But I have many, many times set up AZ copy and other commands to push local backups to Azure storage or AWS buckets or OCI buckets. Use some other third party to have offsite backups. So strongly encourage that. But I have used this quite a bit with Ola Hallegren in Azure VMs to back up to Azure storage, because technically it's all in the same spot. All right, final demo. And this one's really cool. So we're going to take backup sample. I have another version. It's called pre-pit. So pre-point in time is all this is. So what I did is I took the backup sample database, I created a table called point in time with an identity column and a date time column, and then I inserted data into that and waited like half a second and went through it 10 times. So we have some data. So if we restore my pre-pit and then the transaction log after doing the insert, we take a look and we can see the 10 transactions and the time that they were taken. So roughly 30 seconds apart. So something happened right around here. David did an update without a where clause, right? So we want to restore right up to that point in time. So I could put the time in there. So let's come here and take a look. So it restored right up to that time. Well, if I drop this down, actually I needed to go the other direction. Paste. So slightly sooner or older, then we have the 5th transaction. So you're doing transaction log backups every 15 minutes. The mindset of many of us were, oh, well, I could restore that transaction log. So if something happened during those 15 minutes, I have to go to the one before. So I'd lose the time after that transaction log up to the point that something bad happened, unless I was restoring that transaction log and then trying to get the data, some other way. But no, you can truly specify the time that you want to stop. So if you know when, and this is just for illustration to show, no, it truly does stop at that point within the transaction log backup. So within that file, I could specify 2 minutes in, 3 minutes in, whatever time of day to tell it stop at that point. And so then I could keep rolling forward every minute to see when that bad thing happened. When did that data go away? When did that table drop? So I could restore with standby and look, and then roll forward, restore with standby and look to see when we need to stop. But once you restore and then it's like, oh, yep, so it happened at that time. Well, now you've rolled that forward. So this would be, hey, I'm restoring on 2 different systems, one production, one in test. So the test, I'm rolling forward, bit by bit to see when it happened. And then we stop at that point in production to get as close to the accident as possible. So again, this is more advanced stuff, but oh my gosh, if you don't know it exists, you don't know that those tools are in your toolbox to where you can back up the tail end of a transaction log. You can stop at a point in time within a transaction log in that restore. This is really, really cool stuff. And all of those demos are available to you. And this session's recorded, and there's like 20 more of this session out on YouTube over the years. I do hope to add a few more things. I just don't know with the time. It's like with a differential. I had somebody that was trying to argue with me that, oh, well, we could restore a differential. So we have weekly Sunday fulls, and we're doing a migration Friday night. So we could restore the Friday morning the Thursday night differential Friday morning, so the differential Friday night would go faster. I'm like, that's not how it works. It's replacing every page that has changed. So yes, you can restore multiple differentials, but if I restore one from Tuesday and then I restore Wednesday, well, Wednesday still is updating all the same pages that Tuesdays did as well. So they get bigger and it's replacing every single page. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. I'm like, it is. These aren't incremental. They're differential. So I went and I built a demo to prove it to them. But there's just so many other bits and pieces I've come across over the years that I want to work into the next version of the book and a more advanced session. All of these demos, I was doing a single full backup. Well, what if backed up and did a split where I'm going out to 4 files instead of one, to be able to speed up the time of doing your backups and restores. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be tweaked and tuned, but for me, these are the most important that every production DBA or person that's responsible for backup and recovery should be aware of. And there's other things that you can tweak and tune, but if you have these down for the tail log, the point in time, you could potentially do piecemeals. It's you get to start improving your recovery strategy. So, any questions?
I don't have any so far. This has been phenomenal. Um, one one note, Carl made a really good note that when you highlight your scripts, you always go bottom up, and it prevents not selecting a where clause when
Yep.
you're doing a lot of the work.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, either throw them in the chat or come off mute. The bottom line, I will flat out say if you have not practiced this, where this is not something that you hit a search engine for in the event of an emergency, you need to do so because this stuff happens. And it happens multiple times in the life of pretty much any database out there.
Yep.
It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
One of those things you can bank on.
Yep.
Is it out of scope for this to be talked about, increase the number of files for backup to try to increase your backup performance and speed?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. How I want to expand this to show additional, but then I need 90 minutes, 75 minutes or 90 minutes.
Hey,
It's tough, right?
come up.
People think backup is simple, but it's not, right?
No. I mean, there's a lot of other advanced things. And honestly, one of the first times I got into really needing to back up to multiple files was the early days of Azure, where a single blob couldn't be more than like 2 gig. So I'm trying to move databases. And so I was having to split databases up into enough files to be able to achieve getting it up there. And but yeah, just seeing the throughput performance where I'm limited per connection to some storage device. So if I could put it across 4 threads or 8 threads, which is basically 8 files, that I would be able to get sequential performance improvements. So there, for those larger databases, yes, but I've come across customers where I get in and their DBA had read a blog post that, hey, this makes it faster, and their 50 gig database they're splitting across a dozen files. And I'm like, you're just complicating things. You don't you don't have an IO problem you're trying to overcome with a database that small. But yeah,
Right.
there are more advanced. You can start getting into gosh, what is it like?
Oh, buffer count,
Yes, and it's like
max
something size.
block size.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to say
Yeah,
like
just go
MTU
down to the
size.
backup, all the different properties in the backup command, right? I mean, there's so many different ones that a lot of times just they don't matter for a lot of databases, right? I mean, until you cross over a threshold of size, a lot of that stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. Does anybody work with change data capture?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Do you know the syntax to have to include if you want to restore the database and keep the CDC data?
Not off the top of my head, but I could find
Yeah,
it.
it's something like with keep CDC or something like that.
Yeah.
That again, it's not very
No.
publicized. It's like, oh yeah, well you're going to lose that. You don't have to.
Yeah.
It's kind of like with replication. There's one like keep replication to keep some of those bits. But yeah, there's a lot of additional things that can be in the where clause or in the with. So do this with keep CDC, keep replication, specifying the multiple files. I mean, I could probably do a full day workshop just on backup commands and
You want
restore commands.
you want to? Because quite literally, if you want to do a part two for this, we can make it as long as you want. We're not limited to an hour. We can do whatever we
That's
want.
true.
So think about it. If you
Yeah.
want to do a 2 hour session, if you want to do a 4 hour half day session, you just tell me when and where. I'm happy to host it.
Rock on. Yeah, maybe we yeah, let's talk.
Yeah,
Because I can put
shoot
together
me.
some of these other advanced things and then pull in a few of us and it just be, hey, we're going through telling war stories and showing some really cool, code.
That'd be a fun day. Yeah, shoot me a note. Let's get this on the books because that'd be fun. Because the permutations of the restores are limitless with all the odd scenarios and all the one-offs and all the one in a million scenarios that aren't
Mhm.
one in a million anymore.
Right.
There's so many of these. Just like we've got one right now. You mentioned the S3 backups.
Mhm.
We got somebody doing S3 backups on-prem. They have object storage that they're backing up to, and you can use MinIO or some other utility like that. And it's an object-based file system, and you can host it anywhere. So
Oh,
they're
that's cool.
they're backing up to object, and then they're pumping data to a bunch of different places, and then they're using it for AI training.